Get out of my sight! You do not belong here!
Get out of the car, Aisha! Gay Young's voice was as cold as the morning air. The snap of her black leather gloves sounded like a small explosion against the quiet driveway. She did not look at her daughter-in-law. Instead, she pointed one sharp finger toward the house. Her eyes stayed fixed on the sky, acting as if Aisha were a stain on a clean window. Aisha froze. Her fingers tightly gripped the soft fabric of her camel coat. She had bought this coat just for the sole autumn, wanting to fit in and look refined. Now, standing in her own driveway next to the car her husband had bought her, she felt like a stranger. Being ordered away like a lost dog in front of the house staff made her skin burn with shame. She turned her head to look at Jiwon. He was her husband, the man who had promised to protect her. He stood perfectly still in his black suit, looking like a statue carved from stone. His face showed no emotion at all. He did not speak. He did not move to help her. His silence felt like a heavy weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe. Aisha's large brown eyes searched his for any sign of support, but his gaze was locked onto his mother. The power in the driveway had shifted in a single second. Behind them, the large black SUV stood open, a symbol of the life they shared that was now being torn apart. Aisha felt small under the gray sky, but even as her heart hammered against her ribs, she didn't move. She waited, caught between the mother's command and the husband's silence. Aisha stood in the cold wind of the driveway, but her mind drifted back to a much warmer day. It was the day she and Jiwon got married. In her memory, the Nigerian sun was bright and gold. The air had been thick with the smell of jollof rice and expensive perfumes. That day, she was not a stain or a guest. She was a queen. She remembered her wedding dress. It was a beautiful mix of her two worlds. She wore traditional Yoruba lace that was so white it almost glowed against her deep brown skin. Around her neck, she wore pearls that Jiwon had given her. At the party, her family was loud and full of life. They danced until their feet were sore, their laughter filling the air like music. Aisha was the earth, warm, open, and full of color. Then there was Jiwon. Even in the middle of all that Nigerian heat and noise, he had been like a piece of stone. He wore a black suit that cost more than most cars. He didn't dance, and he didn't shout. He stood by her side with a small, private smile that only she was allowed to see. While her brothers joked and her sisters sang, Jiwon moved through the crowd like a shadow. He was the stone, hard, quiet, and strong. He had promised her father that he would keep her safe. He told her family that in Seoul she would have everything she ever wanted. Aisha believed him because back then his silence felt like a shield. She thought his cold world just needed her warmth to melt the ice. She didn't realize that some ice was too thick to melt, especially when it was frozen by years of family pride. In the flashback, she saw Ga Young for the first time. The older woman had sat in the front row of the wedding, wearing a gray dress and a face that never changed. She didn't eat the food. She didn't join the songs. She just watched Aisha with those piercing, judging eyes. She looked at Aisha's loud, happy family as if they were a puzzle she didn't want to solve. Aisha remembered leaning toward Jiwon during their first dance. "Your mother looks unhappy," she had whispered. Jiwon had tightened his grip on her waist. "She is just traditional," he replied. "Once we are home in Seoul, she will see who you are. She will learn to love you." But standing now in the gray light of the Seoul morning, Aisha realized the truth. Ga Young had never planned to learn. She had been waiting for the sun to go down so she could show Aisha how cold the Park family could truly be. The warmth of the wedding felt 1,000,000 miles away. All that was left was the stone. The change did not happen all at once. It started like a slow leak in a pipe, quiet and steady, ice until the whole house felt underwater. When Ga Young moved in, she brought more than just her suitcases and her silver-haired authority. She brought a sense of emptiness that she called order. To Ga Young, anything that was not gray, black, or white did not belong in the Park family home. Aisha had spent a year turning the house into a home. In the hallway, she had hung a large, hand-carved wooden mask from her grandfather's village. It had deep lines and a powerful face that made Aisha feel brave every time she walked past it. One Tuesday afternoon, Aisha came home from the market to find the wall empty. The mask was gone. In its place was a flat silver mirror that reflected nothing but the cold, white walls. "It was dusty," Ga-young said, not looking up from her tea. She sat in the living room, her back perfectly straight. She wore her signature black gloves, even inside. "This house is a place of business and history. We cannot have primitive things cluttering the sightlines. It is not fit for Jiwon's status." Aisha's heart sank, but she tried to be patient. She went to the guest room to find her mask, but it wasn't there. She found it in the garage, tucked inside a brown cardboard box like it was trash. Next to it were her bright orange throw pillows and the woven baskets her mother had sent from Lagos. Those baskets used to hold the mail and the car keys. Now the keys sat on a cold marble tray that looked like it belonged in a hotel. Every day, more of Aisha's life disappeared. Ga-young called it cleaning, but Aisha knew it was an erasure. The house began to smell like lemon bleach and expensive floor wax instead of the spicy, rich scent of Aisha's cooking. Ga-young even replaced the soft, yellow light bulbs with bright blue-white ones. Under the new lights, Aisha's deep brown skin looked different to her in the mirror, harsher, as if she were the only thing in the room that didn't match the furniture. Aisha tried to talk to Jiwon about it one night in their bedroom. She held his hand, looking for the man who had danced with her in the Nigerian sun. "Your mother is taking everything away, Jiwon. The house feels like a museum. It doesn't feel like us anymore." Jiwon looked at the empty space where a colorful painting used to hang. His jaw tightened, a small sign that he was stressed. "She is just trying to help, Aisha. She thinks the house needs to look a certain way for the associates who visit. Just let her have this. It is easier than fighting her." But it wasn't easier. Every time Aisha walked into a room, she felt like she was being pushed out. The house was becoming sterile and perfect, like a hospital room where nothing is allowed to grow. Ga-young would walk through the halls, touching the surfaces with her gloved fingers, looking for a reason to find Aisha unfit. Aisha realized then that the cleaning wasn't about the art or the dust. Ga-young was trying to scrub Aisha's soul out of the house until there was nothing left but the cold, hard stone of the park name. The morning of the appointment was gray and silent. Ga-young did not ask Aisha if she wanted to go. She simply informed her that the car was waiting. They drove to a quiet part of the city, stopping at a building that looked more like a temple than a doctor's office. Inside, the air smelled of dried roots and old paper. There were no bright posters or friendly nurses, only the sound of a ticking clock and the sharp gaze of an elderly man in a white robe. "This is Dr. Han," Ga-young said, her voice echoing in the stone room. "He has looked after the park bloodline for 50 years. He knows what a body should look like if it is meant to carry a leader." Aisha was told to sit on a wooden bench. She felt small and exposed in the cold room. The doctor did not smile. He began to check her pulse and look at her eyes, but Ga-young did not stay quiet. She stood in the corner, her black gloves clasped in front of her, watching every move Aisha made. "Look at her frame, doctor," Ga-young said, her lip curling in a small, cruel way. "The bones are different. The structure is not what we are used to in our family. I worry that her body is too stubborn, too heavy to nurture a park child. Is it even possible for a body so different from ours to hold something so pure?" Aisha felt a hot wave of shame rise to her face. She thought of her mother and her sisters back in Nigeria, strong, beautiful women who had carried children with ease and joy. In her own world, her body was seen as a blessing. Here, under Ga-young's judging eyes, she was being spoken about like a broken machine. The doctor remained silent, but Ga-young stepped closer, her heels clicking on the floor. "She eats too much spice. Her skin is too thick. I see no softness here, only a stranger who does not fit the mold. My son deserves a legacy. Not an experiment. Aisha gripped the edge of the wooden bench until her knuckles turned light. She wanted to shout that she was a human being. Not an experiment. She wanted to tell them that her heart beat just like theirs. But she knew that in this room, her words had no power. Ga Young wasn't looking for a medical answer. She was looking for a way to make Aisha feel like a failure. As the doctor finished his notes, Ga Young sighed loudly. "It is as I feared. A vessel must be perfect to carry a king. If the soil is wrong, the seed will never grow. We are wasting time with a body that was never meant for this bloodline." When they walked back to the car, Aisha felt hollow. The city of Seoul blurred past the window. She realized that to Ga Young, she wasn't a wife or a woman. She was just a problem that needed to be solved. As she looked at her reflection in the glass, she saw her large, expressive eyes filled with tears she refused to let fall. She was being told her body was a cage, but deep down, a small spark of anger began to glow. She was more than what they said. She just had to survive long enough to prove it. The house felt colder than the air outside after the doctor's visit. Aisha walked through the white marble halls, feeling like a ghost in her own life. Every time she passed a mirror, she heard Ga Young's voice calling her unsuitable and wrong. She went to the front door, needing to feel the wind on her face just to know she was still alive. She stood on the stone steps, looking at the gray Seoul sky. She didn't hear the heavy door open behind her. She didn't hear the soft click of expensive shoes on the floor. It was only when a shadow fell over her that she knew Ji-won was there. She didn't turn around. She was afraid that if she looked at him, she would finally break into a million pieces. Ji-won didn't say a word. He stepped closer, his presence feeling like a wall of heat against her back. He reached out with his steady, pale hands. Slowly and carefully, he took hold of the collar of her camel coat. He pulled the fabric together, straightening the lines and tucking the edges in to keep the cold out. It was a simple act, but his touch was gentle, far different from the sharp, pointing fingers of his mother. Aisha finally turned to look at him. Her large, brown eyes were wet with the tears she was trying to hide. She wanted to ask him why he let his mother say those things. She wanted to ask if he also thought her body was a problem. But when her eyes met his, the words died in her throat. For the first time, Ji-won's stone face was not empty. Deep in his dark eyes, there was a flicker of something terrifying. It was the hidden storm he kept locked away from the world. It wasn't anger directed at her. It was a cold, sharp fire directed at everything that made her hurt. He looked at her with a focus that was so strong it made her heart skip a beat. In that look, he gave her a silent promise. He didn't need to shout to show his power. His eyes said, "I see you. I hear what they say. And I have not forgotten who you are." He held her gaze for a long moment, his thumb brushing against the fabric of her coat near her neck. "The wind is picking up," he said quietly. His voice was deep and steady, like the low hum of a powerful engine. "But you are not alone in this house, Aisha. Remember that." He let go of her coat and stepped back, his face returning to its usual mask of calm authority. He looked toward the hallway where Ga Young was likely watching from the shadows. The dangerous man was back, but Aisha felt a tiny spark of hope. She realized that Ji-won was not just a statue. He was a man waiting for the right moment to strike. As she watched him walk away, she pulled her coat tighter. The fabric felt warmer now, not because of the wool, but because of the silent promise he had left behind. She wasn't fit for his mother's bloodline, but she was the only woman who could see the storm inside the boss. For now, that had to be enough. The dining room was filled with the smell of expensive food, but Aisha had no appetite. The table was set with the finest silver, and the blue-white lights made every plate shine like ice. Ga Young sat at the head of the table, her silver hair perfectly styled and her black gloves finally removed to reveal thin, pale hands. She looked like a queen waiting for a show to begin. The heavy doors opened, and a young woman walked in. She moved with a quiet grace that made her seem like she was floating. Her skin was as pale as milk, and her black hair was pulled back into a tight, glossy bun. She wore a simple, dark navy dress that screamed of old money and high status. "Aisha, Jiwon," Ga-young said, her voice full of pride. "This is Min-hee. Her family has been close to ours for 3 generations. She is the daughter of Chairman Cho." Min-hee bowed low, first to Ga-young and then to Jiwon. She barely looked at Aisha, as if Aisha were just a piece of the furniture. When she sat down across from Jiwon, she looked perfectly at home. Oh, she knew which fork to use and how to sit without touching the back of her chair. She was the suitable bride Ga-young had always wanted, a woman who fit the mold perfectly. Throughout the dinner, Ga-young spoke as if Aisha were not there. She talked about Min-hee's education, her refined family history, and how strong her health was. The word health hung in the air like a threat. It was a clear reminder of the doctor's office and the insults about Aisha's body. "A family like ours needs a certain kind of future," Ga-young said, looking directly at Jiwon. "We need someone who understands our traditions in her very bones. Someone whose blood is a match for the park name. Don't you agree, Min-hee?" Min-hee smiled softly, her eyes flickering toward Jiwon. "I only wish to serve the family in the best way possible, Mrs. Ari Park." Aisha felt a cold lump in her throat. She looked at her own hands, which were deep brown against the white tablecloth. She felt like a dark spot in a room that was trying to be perfectly white. Every compliment Ga-young gave to Min-hee was a slap in the face to Aisha. She was being replaced at her own dinner table, and the suitable rival was sitting there, ready to take her life. Jiwon remained silent, his face as still as stone. He ate slowly, his eyes focused on his plate. He didn't look at Min-hee, but he didn't look at Aisha either. The hidden storm she had seen on the porch seemed to have vanished, replaced by the cold authority of a Mafia boss. Aisha's heart hammered in her chest. She realized that Ga-young wasn't just bringing a guest to dinner, she was declaring war. The stakes were no longer just about art or spices. It was about who had the right to stand by Jiwon's side. As the dinner went on, Aisha felt the walls closing in. She was a Nigerian queen in her own mind, but in this room, she was being told she was nothing. She looked at Jiwon, searching for any sign of the promise he had made, but his silence was the loudest sound in the room. The house was as silent as a grave. Jiwon had gone to a late meeting, and Min-hee had finally left, leaving behind the faint smell of her expensive perfume. Aisha could not sleep. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Ga-young's cruel smile and the way Min-hee looked at her husband. She felt like a shadow in her own home, and she was tired of being afraid. She needed to find something, anything, to understand why Ga-young was so obsessed with purity. Aisha found herself standing in front of Ga-young's private study. It was a room Aisha was never allowed to enter. The door was heavy wood, but tonight it was not fully closed. Aisha's heart hammered against her ribs as she pushed it open. The room was freezing and smelled like old paper and lemon wax. It was perfectly organized, just like Ga-young herself. Aisha moved to the large desk. She wasn't sure what she was looking for until she saw a small silver key sitting in a velvet tray. It looked old and important. Her eyes scanned the room and landed on a painting of a winter mountain. She noticed the frame was slightly crooked. Aisha moved the painting and found a small steel safe built into the wall. Her hands were shaking. She tried the silver key. It turned with a heavy click that sounded like a shout in the quiet room. Inside the safe, there were no gold bars or jewels. There was only a single yellowed envelope. Aisha pulled out the papers inside. They were medical records from 40 years ago, written in both Korean and English. As she read the words, her breath caught in her throat. The papers spoke about Jiwon's father, the great leader of the Park family. But they didn't speak of his power. They spoke of a secret. According to the records, Jiwon's father was never able to have children. There were test results and letters from doctors that Ga-young had hidden for decades. Then, at the bottom of the stack, Aisha found a birth document. It was for a baby boy born to a woman who was not Ga Young. Aisha's eyes went wide. The noble bloodline that Ga Young talked about every day was a lie. Jiwon was not Ga Young's biological son, and he didn't even carry the pure Park blood she was so proud of. He was a secret child, adopted to keep the family's power alive. Aisha sat on the floor holding the papers to her chest. She realized that Ga Young's hatred for her wasn't about Aisha's skin or her body. It was about Ga Young's own fear. Ga Young had spent 40 years pretending to be the perfect mother of a perfect bloodline. Seeing Aisha, a woman who was real and proud, made Ga Young feel like her lie was about to break. Aisha heard a floorboard creak in the hallway. She quickly put the papers back, locked the safe, and hid the key. She slipped out of the room just as a shadow moved past the end of the hall. She was still a Nigerian woman in a cold, ice-stone house, and her body was still being judged. But as she walked back to her room, she didn't feel like a victim anymore. She held a secret that could burn the whole Park empire to the ground. For the first time in 7 months, Aisha felt like she was the one with the power. The grand ballroom of the Park estate was filled with the most powerful people in the city. Crystal chandeliers hung from the ceiling, throwing sharp white light onto the polished floors. Men in expensive black suits and women in silk dresses stood in small circles, speaking in low voices. The air was thick with the scent of lilies and cold ambition. Aisha did not walk through the front doors as the lady of the house. Instead, she was forced to enter through the kitchen. Ga Young had spent the morning giving her orders, her voice like a whip. "Oh, if you cannot provide a child, you must at least provide service," she had said. Now, Aisha wore a plain black dress and a white apron. She carried a heavy silver tray filled with glasses of champagne. In the center of the room, on a raised platform, sat Ga Young and Minhee. Minhee looked like a porcelain doll in a traditional dress made of gold and cream silk. She sat with her hands folded, a soft smile on her face as guests bowed to her. She was being treated like the new queen, the pure woman who would save the family name. Aisha moved through the crowd, her tray feeling heavier with every step. Her deep brown skin stood out against the sea of pale faces. She could feel the guests' eyes on her. Some were curious, but most were cold and mocking. They whispered behind their hands as she offered them drinks. But she was a Nigerian queen being treated like a ghost, invisible to those who had once called her a friend. "More wine, girl," a man said without even looking at her face. Aisha's hand shook as she filled his glass. Her large, almond-shaped eyes were wide with shock, but she kept her head down. Every time she looked toward the platform, she saw Ga Young watching her with a look of pure victory. Ga Young wanted this public humiliation to break Aisha's spirit. She wanted the whole world to see that the black woman was no longer part of the noble Park story. Jiwon stood near the edge of the platform. He was dressed in his sharpest suit, his jet-black hair slicked back perfectly. He looked every bit like the dangerous Mafia boss he was. He watched the room with cold, focused eyes, but he did not look at Minhee, and he did not look at his mother. His gaze was fixed on the far wall, his face a mask of stone. Aisha caught his eye for a split second as she passed. She saw the hidden storm in his gaze, darker and more intense than ever before. He watched her carry the tray, his jaw tightening so hard that a muscle jumped in his cheek. He was the hidden storm, and the air in the room felt tight, like the moment before a lightning strike. Aisha felt the weight of the secret she had found in the safe. She looked at the guests bowing to a pure bloodline that was built on a lie. She looked at Minhee, who was being honored for a fantasy. The humiliation burned, but the truth inside Aisha was even hotter. She realized that she was the only real person in a room full of performers. She straightened her back and held the tray steady. She was standing in the middle of a war, and the biggest explosion was yet to come. The music in the ballroom was soft, but the tension was loud. Ga Young stood up from her chair and raised a golden cup. The room went silent. "Tonight," she said, her voice sounding like ice, "we honor the true future of the Park family. We choose a path that is pure. We choose a woman who fits our history. She looked at Min-hee and then pointedly away from Aisha, who was still standing in the back with her heavy tray. Ga-young turned to her son. Ji-won, come. Take Min-hee's hand. Show the world that our bloodline is strong. Ji-won did not move toward Min-hee. Instead, he walked to the center of the platform. He stood under the bright lights, looking taller and more dangerous than ever. He did not look like a man about to celebrate. He looked like a man about to destroy everything. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small stack of papers. You speak of bloodlines, Mother, Ji-won said. His voice was not loud, but it reached every corner of the room. You speak of purity, as if it is something you own. You have spent months telling my wife that her body is not fit for this family. You have treated her like a servant because you say she is a stranger to our name. Ga-young's face went pale. Ji-won, sit down. This is not the time. It is exactly the time, Ji-won replied. He held up the papers Aisha had found in the safe. These are the medical records from the year I was born. They say that my father could never have children. They say that the Park bloodline ended 40 years ago. A gasp moved through the crowd like a wave. Min-hee stepped back, made her face full of shock. Ga-young tried to grab the papers, but Ji-won held them high. I was adopted at 3 days old, Ji-won said, his eyes finally finding Aisha's. I am the child of a woman you never met and a man you didn't know. I am the stranger in this house, Mother, not Aisha. The silence that followed was heavy and painful. The powerful guests looked at each other, realizing that the noble family they served was built on a massive lie. Ga-young's hands began to shake. Her black gloves, once a symbol of her power, now looked like she was hiding something dirty. You did this to protect your pride, Ji-won continued, his voice growing hard. You attacked my wife because her skin and her body are real. She doesn't have to hide who she is. But you? You have lived a lie for 40 years. You told her she was a blemish. Oh, but you are the one who broke the history you love so much. Ji-won stepped off the platform. He walked straight past the elders, past Min-hee, and past his mother. He stopped in front of Aisha. With everyone watching, he took the heavy silver tray from her hands and set it on a nearby table. He took her hand in his grip firm and warm. The ceremony is over, Ji-won announced to the room. Aisha looked at Ga-young. The older woman looked small and broken, her secret finally out in the light. Aisha's almond eyes were clear now. She wasn't fit for a lie, and she finally understood why. She wasn't a guest in this family. She was the only thing in it that wasn't a performance. Together, she and Ji-won turned their backs on the platform and walked toward the door. The heavy doors of the ballroom swung open, all letting in the cool night air. Aisha and Ji-won walked out together, their footsteps steady on the stone path. Behind them, the sounds of the banquet had turned into a low, confused murmur. The bright, blue-white lights of the mansion began to fade as they moved toward the car. For the first time in 7 months, the weight on Aisha's chest was gone. She felt light, as if she were finally waking up from a long, cold dream. Ji-won opened the passenger door for her. He didn't just stand back. He waited until she was settled, his eyes meeting hers with a softness she had only seen in her memories of Nigeria. He climbed into the driver's seat and started the engine. He didn't look back at the grand house or the gate. He simply drove. Inside the mansion, the silence was different now. It was not the quiet of a museum, but it was the silence of a ruin. Ga-young stood alone on the platform. The guests were leaving quickly, not wanting to be near the scandal. Min-hee had already vanished into the shadows of her own family's car. Ga-young looked around at her perfect home. The marble floors were spotless, and the silver trays were still shiny, but the house felt empty. She walked to the large window and watched the red taillights of Ji-won's car disappear into the city. She had spent her whole life scrubbing and cleaning, trying to hide the truth behind expensive art and pure traditions. She had pushed Aisha away to protect a secret that was already broken. Now, The walls she had built were still standing, but there was no one left inside to admire them. She sat down in her favorite chair, her hands trembling in her lap. The house was exactly how she wanted it, quiet, orderly, and sterile. But for the first time, she realized that perfect was just another word for lonely. As they reached the edge of the city, Ji-won reached over and took Aisha's hand. "Where should we go?" he asked. His voice was no longer a hidden storm. It was clear and calm. Aisha looked at her husband. She thought about the wooden mask in the garage and the spices tucked away in boxes. She thought about the woman she was. A Nigerian woman who was loud, warm, and real. She wasn't fit for Ga Young's bloodline, and that was a good thing. She was fit for a life that was honest. "Anywhere that has a kitchen we can paint ourselves," Aisha said with a small smile, "and anywhere that has enough room for us to be exactly who we are." Ji-won nodded, his grip on her hand tightening in a silent promise. They drove toward the horizon, leaving the stone and the lies behind. Aisha looked at her reflection in the window. Her almond eyes were bright, and her skin glowed under the streetlights. She was not a blemish. She was the start of a new story, and this time the legacy would be built on love instead of shame.